Hey everyone, and welcome back to Passmore Books. I'm Brittany Passmore, and I'm so excited to talk to you today about all the books I've been reading this month. And I found that October has been a very British month for me, and I didn't plan it that way, but it turned out that way. So let's get started and pass more books. So this month I think I finished 4 books total, but I started 2 that I just haven't finished yet that'll be carrying on into November, and hopefully I'll also be able to talk about some other books that I'm hoping to read in November too. The first book that I read was The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. I'd been waiting for this book to come out for a while. This is the second book in her Charlemagne's series. It's cute. It's lesson 2 of the Charlemagnes. The first book is lesson 1, and anyway, it's a fun series about a magical school that is rather dangerous. So I talked about this series a little bit in a recent video. Essentially the premise is that there's this magical world, kind of like Harry Potter, where there's wizards and normal people who don't know that magic exists. But the thing is that the magical world is much more dangerous than the Harry Potter world is, or other similar worlds. It's full of lots of magical creatures and beasts that are basically attracted to the magical spark mana that's in these wizards and just wants to eat them. So these wizards are constantly fighting for their lives, and their children especially are in a really dangerous circumstance because they don't quite know how to defend themselves, and they're kind of coming into their magic, so they're very attractive to these monsters. So the wizarding community decided that the best way to handle this really dangerous and difficult transition for these kids is to send them basically to high school for 4 years in this wizarding school that would lock them up and keep most of the monsters out and train them in all the magical things that they need to survive. The thing is, these monsters are pretty persistent, and when you have thousands of students gathered together who all have this mana that they're attracted to, they try to wriggle their way into the school anyway and try to pick off students where they can. So these students are actually still fighting for their lives, just in a slightly less dangerous environment than the outside world is. Probably about half of them die before graduating. So pretty dark situation, but the main character, Elle, is very spunky. She's funny, she's sarcastic, and to top it all off, she has an affinity to become a dark evil sorceress and essentially take over the world. She's basically trying to not only survive in the school, but trying to resist this fate that she's drawn toward. So The Last Graduate specifically picks up with Elle's senior year. She's just survived her junior year, has finally made some friends, feels like she belongs somewhere, and there was a big cliffhanger at the end of book 1 that we were all like, oh no, is there something bad coming? But essentially the main problem that Elle is facing in book 2 is that she is really just trying to make sure that she can graduate alive from this school. She's trying to survive to the end of the year, and eventually realizes that she actually cares about a lot of people in this school, that she wants to save the people who are important to her as well. I really loved seeing Elle grow in this book. I felt like she grew so much as a person, and even though she's still our same sarcastic kind of dark character in the end, she also really becomes, I guess, more compassionate. I loved her progression in this book. I was so mad about the ending. I won't actually say what happened because spoilers, but I was very mad with the decision that one of her friends made at the end. But I shouldn't be surprised. It was the same kind of cliffhanger that was at the end of book 1. It just suddenly is this cliffhanger that this snap kind of decision or thing happens. And now I of course can't wait for book 3. I'm not sure when it's coming out yet, but so mad at the ending. But it was a good ending. It was good. It was great. One thing I'll say is that Naomi's writing style, it's different in every book. Her writing style changes in every kind of series book she writes. And this particular like writing style that she's got going on with the Shalamance books is a very like kind of stream of consciousness thought. This book is told from Elle's perspective, and she just kind of talks at you. It's helpful because it kind of makes all of her explanations about the spells and the monsters and the culture and things like that sort of intuitive and natural. But sometimes I almost had to like pause for a second and be like, okay, I can digest all of this, right? It's a little bit different writing style than I'm used to, but I think still so well done. Lots and lots of fun. The next book I read in October is a book that I was supposed to read at the same time as my husband Calvin. Kind of read it after him, a little bit late for his class, his literary class that he's taking this semester. It's called When the Emperor Was Divine by Julie Otsuka, and it's really, really short. Like really, really short, really fast read. It's about a Japanese family who is taken to a concentration camp during World War II, and they essentially relocate from California, I believe it is, to Utah, to Topaz. One really interesting thing about the beginning of this book is that in the beginning, well, you never know a character's name. It's just the father, the mother, the girl, and the boy. Like, you don't get names for them. You hardly get any descriptions besides like a generic, her black hair was tied back in a ponytail kind of thing. And part of the reason for that in the beginning is so that you see that they just seem like such a normal family. They're just so normal. The girl is taking piano lessons. The boy, you know, has his posters of like the sports stars he loves or whatever. They're just such a normal family living a normal life. And suddenly they just kind of have to pick up everything and move to a concentration camp and have their loyalty tested because the country's at war. And it's kind of crazy to realize just like how like me those people were, and to see how their life completely changes just because they're from Japan. I think the writing was lovely. I think what hit me most powerfully was the ending, the very last chapter that was kind of from the father's perspective, also probably kind of from like a lot of other perspectives. It was almost like a poem. It was kind of poetic. But that last chapter, like probably the shortest chapter of them all actually, but that was really just hard hitting about the desperation that war kind of creates. It's not the kind of book that I like naturally gravitate toward and like want to pick up, but I'm glad that I read it. It was good, and I think it's fun to see the kinds of books that my husband's reading. I almost forgot, but I started another book this month that my husband's been reading for his class. It's called Blood Meridian, and neither of us like it very much. So he was like, "You don't have to read this with me," and I was like, "I think I won't." It's essentially just throwing senseless violence at you, trying to like, I guess, prove that our society has become desensitized to violence and like impact you. I don't know. It's just not a book for me. So I read like maybe 2 chapters of it. Not going back. So the next book I finished was Marie Brennan's second Lady Trent memoir book series. Their second book is called The Tropic of Serpents. It's basically just about Lady Trent. She's not Lady Trent then. She's Isabella Camhurst at the time. It's about her second big voyage into studying dragons, and she goes to a country or a continent that's basically, I think, was inspired by Africa, and she is kind of trying to maneuver politically a little bit, but mostly she's just trying to like maneuver enough so that she can study dragons and eventually gets to go into this like swamp jungle that's like really, really dangerous and tries to study the dragons there. So The Tropic of Serpents was fun, pretty good read. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book, and I will say I've already started the third book, and I'm already enjoying the third book more than I enjoyed the second book. That's something that happens sometimes, often I guess. I think a lot of us get disappointed by sequels. I don't know, it just wasn't the same like sense of adventure that I got from book 1. And even though there was like some good character development in Isabella in this book, I don't know, it just wasn't all that I was hoping it would be. But I still like overall enjoyed it. So glad I read it, and I'm glad that I was able to move on to book 3. Speaking of book 3, I did start it, got about halfway through, and then it was due on Libby, and my week was just a little bit too crazy to really fit enough reading time in to finish it before I had to give it up. So I have it on hold again to finish the last half of book 3. Hopefully within the next few weeks I'll get it back and can finish it. Like I said, I'm enjoying book 3, Voyage of the Basilisk, a lot more than book 2 already, so I'm really excited to see where it's gonna go. What's really fun about book 3 so far is that Isabella is going on like a sea voyage around the world, so it's kind of a different setting where there's like ships involved, but also her son is coming with her on this trip, which I think is so fun. I love seeing their relationship grow and change, so that's been really fun. The last book I actually finished this month was actually some fan fiction that one of my friends asked me to read. Well, I asked to read it. Okay, so I made a friend at a writing conference, and she told me that she'd written some Pride and Prejudice fan fiction, and that she had a lot of really positive feedback on fan fiction, and that she was actually going to like publish it on Amazon Kindle. And I was like, oh cool, like what's it about? And she told me about the premise, and I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting, like I'd love to read it sometime. And she was like, here, like I'll just give you the document. It was her unedited version. She was waiting for some edits to come back from a friend, so I read it and actually had a pretty fun time with it. Maybe fan fiction sounds like weird to you, but I think it's really fun. I've like read and written fan fiction since I was like 13. I don't write it so much anymore, and I also don't read it a ton anymore, but I do still really like fan fiction. It's kind of like almost like a guilty pleasure, or just like a nostalgic sort of genre for me. So Pride and Prejudice fan fiction, pretty good deal for me. So her story is called A Look Behind the Mask. It's by Tiffany Thomas. I'll have a link in the bottom for the actual published version that she has up on Amazon. And if this sounds interesting to you, you should totally check it out. So the idea of the story is that when Lizzie was about 12, 13-ish, young teen, she's not out in society yet, she ends up having an experience that like totally changes the course of her life. She runs into a servant that she knows from like the neighboring like Netherfield, and kind of basically realizes that she's being abused by the Lord, not the Lord, the steward, but by the gentleman who lives there at Netherfield. And he physically and sexually abuses her, and Lizzie is horrified to realize that this would even happen to a woman, of course. Then she realizes that this man, Mr. Cartwright, he just seemed like the nicest guy, like so charming and kind and everything. And to realize that like behind all that charm was this evil man who was taking advantage of this poor girl, it really hit her hard, and she goes home wondering like what do I do about this? And she realizes that just because somebody looks nice, acts nice, does not mean that they are nice. And so she kind of gains like a bit of a mission in life to keep herself from getting into a marriage situation where she is like controlled by somebody like that. And she determines like she's going to do whatever she can to try to like see behind whatever mask a man has, that she can know that he's really trustworthy and going to treat her well, because she recognizes that women in that time don't have a ton of freedom, and she's determined to do whatever she can to make sure that she ends up in a relationship that's going to keep her safe and happy. But not only that, she realizes that she doesn't just want that for herself, but she wants that protection and security for her sisters as well. And so she ends up really changing her sisters' lives by encouraging them to look beyond the surface level things. And so what's interesting is that Lizzie and Darcy are the only couple who end up together, because pretty much all the other characters end up with different people at the end. But what is really cool is that a lot of the side characters develop in very satisfying ways throughout the story. Like Lizzie's sister Mary. I loved the way that she developed and turned out in the book. Darcy's younger sister, Georgiana, also becomes a very developed character who we get to see a lot, who's very fun. I also really liked the way that Mr. Bingley developed. He became a much more confident person, I think. I will say that I enjoyed the first half much more than I did the second half. In the second half, I just feel like I didn't really see Darcy and Lizzie's relationship progress in as satisfying a way as they did in the real book. I'm also not sure if I'm happy with the way that Jane's story ended up with, just like who she ended up with. I wish things had been a little bit different, but I don't want to spoil it. So I'll say overall that I had a fun time reading it. And if you're interested in some Pride and Prejudice fan fiction, I think it's a fun one to try out. This month I have still been reading Wives and Daughters. I think I mentioned this in an older video. I don't know. I've mentioned it a couple times. I am currently probably about like a third of the way through, something like that. I am enjoying it so much. Something I didn't realize was how closely the movie follows the book. Like, so much of the actual dialogue is just like in the script and spoken by the actors and actresses in the movie, which makes me so happy because I thought the movie was so well done. I loved it, and especially just being able to read the book and seeing things a little bit more fleshed out and a little bit more of the background of these things, I'm realizing that the movie was done so well and that people were cast really well and that people really portrayed their characters well and that they really took time to put in all these important scenes and make the dialogue really reflect the story. And anyway, it's been a delight to actually read this for the first time. Something that I'm especially loving is just seeing how sweet and kind Roger is. Like, sometimes I just almost swoon to be like, he's so kind, he's so good. And obviously right now he's not in a romantic relationship with anybody at this point in the story. Molly's not romantically inclined toward anyone. She just kind of wants somebody kind of like Osborne, but she's not even in love with Osborne himself, just kind of like this poetic idea of him. So it's just kind of fun to see, even in the beginning, these sweet qualities of Roger and how he is such a good friend to Molly. I'm just so excited to keep going on this journey with them and seeing things develop. I'm having so much fun reading this. So I will be hopefully finishing Wives and Daughters in November. Hopefully also finishing Voyage of the Basilisk in November. It should be pretty easy to finish. And hopefully after that I can move on to the fourth book in the Lady Trent memoir series, which I believe is called... Never mind, I don't remember what it's called. We'll see how far, if I end up finishing those audiobooks in November or just keep going on into December. Either way, I just like to have an audiobook going so that I can pull up an audiobook when I need one, right? Another book that I should be reading in November is a book that my book club and I will pick out. We are going to be meeting probably the week that I get this video posted, so I don't know yet which book we're going to be reading yet. We had been voting on a few books this past month and ended up choosing to read Warbreaker together, which I've already talked about in past video. So good. But our second place choice was actually a three-way tie between Skyward, the Guernsey Literary Peeled Potato Pie Society, that long title. I just call it Guernsey. And then a middle grade book, I think it's called Keeper of the Lost Cities. So we're gonna vote on one of those three to read next month. I've already read Skyward. I wouldn't mind rereading it again, especially since a bunch of like new Skyward things are coming out. So that wouldn't be bad, but I'm also like not feeling like I need to reread Skyward to enjoy those newer Sanderson books that are coming out. So I'm kind of like, indifferent on whether we read that one or not. The Guernsey book, I think, would be lots of fun. I would like almost automatically vote for Keeper of the Lost Cities just because it's fantasy and I am like interested in like the premise. I'm just nervous because I tend to not enjoy middle grade very easily, so I'm nervous that I'll just not be into it. So I kind of want to try Keeper of the Lost Cities. I'm nervous about how I'll enjoy it, but I want to try it. So anyway, we'll see what my book club decides and I'll read one of those books. So it's kind of a lot on my plate to read, especially as things are pretty busy for me right now, just because I'm potty training my toddler, trying to prep for my second baby who's coming in January, still working on like editing business stuff, and there's all these holidays coming up. So I'm not gonna try to like power through all these books, but if I have time to read another book, like another novel, I want to pick up a sci-fi book. My dad recently recommended a bunch to me that just sounded really interesting, and I think what I want to try picking up that he recommended to me is called Off Armageddon Reef by David Weber, the first book in the Safehold series. I think I remember my dad telling me a little bit about it, and it sounded really interesting. I don't actually know that much about Armageddon Reef besides what my dad told me, which I have mostly forgotten because that was like a few months ago that we talked about it. But I think it'll be something cool to try. I think that's it. Those are the books that I read in October, the books that I'm still reading, carrying into November, plus a couple other books that I hope to wrap up with in November as well. I'd love to know what you read this month, what you're hoping to maybe read next month, anything you're currently reading. If you've read any of the books that I mentioned, or if you are wanting to get into any of them, let me know what your vote would be for my book club to read, right? Skyward, Guernsey, or The Keeper of the Lost Cities. If you liked watching this video and chatting with me about these books, please feel free to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time to pass some more books. Bye!